perhaps selling the business or selling shares in the business, but growing a profitable business that you think can meet a need and generate a return on investment itself isn't subject to capital gains. So when you buy a new piece of machinery, you're adding to the asset value of the company. You're hopefully generating new revenue and profit from that. And as long as that company continues, then this change will have no impact on you. So in that regard, capital gains is not an incentive for starting and running a business. It's an issue related to selling the business.
Thank you, and I appreciate the clarification. I'm just going to switch to the Canadian Labour Congress and Ms. Broskin. And before I ask the question, I do want to note that in my riding of St. John's East, the average salary is $50,000, and in Carleton, in Ontario, it's $58,000. Calgary, Forest Lawn, $32,000. Northumberland, Peterborough, $41,000, and Simcoe North, $38,000. How many of your workers see capital gains increases of $250,000?
Virtually none of those workers would be impacted by this, that we can tell. We know that at least a quarter, almost a third of Canadian workers do not have a private or a public pension other than their CPP that they might be eligible for. So I understand and I empathize with those individuals who have built a business, who are using this as a retirement vehicle, and there are ways to navigate that through the lifetime exemption that's going to be indexed and all those kinds of things. But what I'm thinking about is the worker working in a service sector industry for 65 years, can't afford to retire, who has not had the opportunity to put any money aside whatsoever at all. We need a fair taxation system so that we can fund the very programs that workers are going to be relying on: the school nutrition program, dental care, pharmacare, health, workplace safety and health issues, things like making sure our healthcare system works so that those workers actually have the ability to put some additional money in their pockets to maybe put towards an RSP.
Thank you. And very quickly, how many of your unionized workers would have a secondary residence growing in value of about $250,000?
Unless they've inherited some wealth, I don't see any of them falling into that category.
Do you believe that both the employers and the C-suite executives hold a larger part of the capital gains? Do you believe that this will trickle down to your unionized members across the country? In other words, that a top-down approach. So if we make changes and alter what I believe is a fair program in terms of the capital gains, the changes that exist, does that trickle down to workers?
As we heard from some of the other witnesses, we don't anticipate seeing any change in the terms of investments or productivity based on a change to the capital gains exclusions. And so I don't see any of this trickling down to the average worker going to work every single day of their life.
Quickly, Mr. Stanford, back to you. And apart from what I think the very positive changes for Canadians in Budget 2024, back to capital gains, what group do you feel will be disproportionately impacted by these changes, or what income group?
Well, the evidence is clear, both from a snapshot in time of who pays taxes on capital gains in any given year, and then the limited longitudinal data which has been compiled, that the main impact of this change will be on the highest 1 to 2% of Canadian taxpayers. In any given year, only 0.13% of them individually will claim capital gains over $250,000 and therefore have any capital gains at all, subject to the higher inclusion rate. But even over time, given that there are irregularities in how capital gains are staged in someone's life, even over time, the vast majority of those gains are concentrated at the top. In fact, over time, they're more concentrated at the top than in a given year, for the fact that it's very well-off people who tend to claim capital gains year after year rather than a one-time event. So it's not only those people. There are obviously circumstances where an individual of generally modest means will face some additional taxation because of this, but the vast majority of the impact will be felt by the highest income Canadians only.
And thank you, MP Thompson. Now to MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
I'm going to bring up a point of order. I would remind the colleagues that when you bring forward a motion, it has to be in writing, and the official translation has to accompany it. The interpreters must not be called upon to interpret the motion. We have to have the translation that accompanies the original, and that would be very much appreciated. I bring this up to my colleagues in the committee. Let me turn to Mr. Godbout for a question. We are receiving in our writings letters from professionals, many of them, many letters that are single ownership, sole proprietors, and that are corporations, and they don't have the generated income that would put them in the highest level, but they do not seem to be excluded nonetheless from the 1.25 figure. Am I wrong in my thinking? Would there be any type of justified deferral treatment for this particular category of people? Are you talking about people that are not incorporated? It would seem yes. In that case, well, for the 250,000, they should be entitled to it if they make a gain, a capital gains. But with respect to the exemption of $250,000, this is offered on the basis of shares for small businesses. If they don't generate that, they will not have the exemption for small business shares. But this is not a phenomenon that is new, that arises from this legislation. That goes back to the initial type of legislation that was in place. For farmers, it could be agricultural goods or otherwise, but or for non-agricultural activities, though, it would be different, and businesses would be limited to 1.25. Well, thank you very much. I'm not a businessman. I have more knowledge about unions. So for people who wouldn't be incorporated, they would have access to the 250,000. So it's clear. Thank you.
MP Samari, and now to MP Davies, please.
Thank you. Dr. Stanford, in an article recently, you wrote, most academic economists support a higher inclusion rate, partly because it levels the playing field between different types of capital income. Why do most academic economists support a higher inclusion rate?
Yeah, that's on the basis of, for example, surveys of articles published by the Canadian Tax Foundation and commentary from several academic economists. Mr. Smart's work was already referenced earlier today, but many others. There's a longstanding concern about the level playing field between different forms of capital income. And of course, there's a long discussion about making sure that capital income isn't taxed twice, once at the corporate level and then again at the individual level. That is the theoretical justification for the favorable treatment of all forms of capital income. But across the different types of capital income, there's been an emerging and growing inequality in how dividend income is treated versus capital gains income. And because of two things. Number one, an inclusion rate that is too low in order to reach that equality with dividends. And secondly, the decline in the corporate tax rate in Canada over the last couple of decades. It's clear that the treatment of capital gains is now much favorable than the treatment of dividends. And that creates an enormous incentive for companies and tax planners to try and transform any type of income into capital gains rather than interest or other forms of dividend income. And there can be significant efficiency losses from that unequal level playing field. So I think that's the main reason that this idea of increasing the inclusion rate to 2/3 or even 75%, maybe many academic economists have suggested 75% makes sense.
Thank you. And maybe to you and to Ms. Bruska together to comment on, we have heard some professionals, including doctors, claim that they will be hurt by this measure. Dr. Stanford, you wrote, most professionals incorporate to obtain generous tax and liability benefits. Capital gains exemptions are just the icing on that very sweet cake, and most of that icing is still there. Doctors and other professionals can fund retirement like the rest of us via CPP, RSPs, TFSAs, and savings, despite a smaller capital gains loophole. Do doctors and other professionals who choose to incorporate face any unique challenges or barriers to accessing retirement savings than other Canadians? And I would just note that Stats Canada says that today approximately 2/3 of Canadians have no form of workplace pension coverage. I think Ms. Brusque, you commented on that. So I don't know if doctors are facing any particular challenge that most workers are in that regard. Your comments?
I don't think that doctors are facing any particular challenges. They have the opportunity to avail themselves of RSPs, TSFAs, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm more concerned about is the average orderly working in a hospital being taxed on 100% of his or her salary while a doctor is not.
Davies, and now we'll go to MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Dr. Stanford, thanks for appearing back at committee. I know you're no stranger here, so welcome back. You cited a number of statistics, and frankly, I don't dispute any of them because I think we're looking at the same data. In particular, I think there are obviously very wealthy people who have a significant number of capital gains per year. But the same data, the LAD data bank, also shows that capital gains are very, very rare in a person's lifetime, and frankly, if there is a capital gain over $250,000, that it is a once or twice in a lifetime event for a large number of tax filers. In fact, those who have over $250,000 in capital gains on a perennial basis, i.e., say 10 out of 10 years, is only about 160 tax filers out of the sample that they showed. So it is, in fact, a small number of taxpayers which may get a large break. But would you agree that there are some individuals who once or twice in a lifetime will get caught up in this capital gains hike?
Certainly that's true, and I think I said that in my previous intervention. A few things to keep in mind there. Number one, there are important opportunities for individuals who have a rare capital gains event to try and reduce and average out their exposure, and that includes the $250,000 exemption, obviously, from the higher rate, which is stackable across a joint ownership situation. And it also includes the capital gains reserve system, which allows people with an occasional capital gains to average that out over several years. And I'll also point out that this same argument could be applied to other features of our tax system. We have a marginal system of increasing marginal tax rates on personal income, and there are people who end up in the top rate just once or twice in their lifetime, but they still earn that income in that particular year. We do not have a generalized income averaging system in our tax system. And so on some level, if you've made that much money in a year, you should indeed pay taxes on it.
Indeed. That's the way the progressive tax system works. There was also a statistic that suggested, using the same database, that 50% of those who have gains over $250,000 otherwise have other taxable income of less than $120,000. And some individuals, 10% of these in this category, have incomes of less than $20,000. Would you support, or do you think it would be wise to try to narrow the impact of the capital gains measure on just those individuals who are truly in that top 1% to 2% of income earners and not apply to 100% of the general public?
Well, again, the number of individuals who claim who receive large capital gains year after year is small, but they account for an overwhelming share of the total capital gains that are claimed. and an overwhelming and even larger share of the tax benefits associated with that. Now, clearly, the government was attempting to narrow the impact of this measure with the $250,000 threshold. And again, they were following advice from academic economists who've been publishing on this for years. So at some
Mr.
point,
Stanford, I'm going to run out of time. Mr. Stanford, I'm going to run out of time. So I just quickly, would you be in favor of narrowing the application so it's just for those who have high perennial either capital gains incomes or total incomes?
I think there's provisions in the existing legislation that do that, the $250,000 threshold,
So-
and other provisions in our tax system,
Understood.
including the capital
I'll take that
gains
as a
reserve.
yes. Understood. Ms. Brusk, you suggested that many of your members wouldn't be impacted by this, but you have about 3 million members, right? I know of a number of your members who own rental properties that hold them, and not a number of rental properties, but even just one or two that actually hold them in a corporation. They will be taxed. Like, this will impact them immediately. Should we exclude them from this legislation?
The number of members that are in that profitable position are minimal at best, I would argue. The members that I hear from, the workers that I hear from, are certainly not in that kind of a wealthy situation where they have to worry about these situations in terms of the capital gains being increased on their profits.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. Now to PS Turnbull, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, great conversation. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Stanford, I'll start with you. Welcome back. You mentioned in your opening remarks about sort of double barrel fairness, and I thought that was an interesting way to put the fact that this new tax measure is increasing tax fairness while also increasing fairness in terms of the investments that are being made. I wanted to ask you, though, about Kevin Milligan's comments on this. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I found both your article that was recently published, but also his remarks that were published online, really interesting. He said that a lot of the people that criticize these new tax fairness measures are not offering any alternatives to push back on inequality. And I found that really interesting because he said, well, basically, you can infer from this, they don't really care about inequality often in our society. And when Kevin Milligan put the question to himself online, is this new inclusion rate change really effective and efficient? Is it an effective and efficient measure among the others that can be considered? He said yes. Would you agree with that, Mr. Stanford, that this new capital gains change is really effective and efficient as a tax measure for addressing inequality?
Yes, I would, for the reason that capital gains income has become so unduly concentrated among the highest income categories of society, more so than other types of income. And this actually reflects the proactive use of these loopholes by clever tax planners to arrange income so that it comes through a capital gains channel rather than through other channels. And so this is where Mr. Milligan and Professor Milligan and other academic economists want to see a more equal treatment between capital gains and dividends income. So because capital gains are so concentrated at the top end, anything that reduces incrementally the tax advantages of capital gains treatment will have a very powerful impact in reducing inequality through the tax system.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Zurub, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Canadians for Tax Fairness. I was interested in your report that I found on your website about productivity and capital gains inclusion rates, which I read with great interest. And I note that you had said in your opening remarks that there's no correlation between capital gains rates or even by the look of it, tax rates and productivity. As has been claimed numerous times, mostly by conservatives, I think, that are trying to push back against this. What I noticed in the report, though, was that, in fact, what I am inferring from this, and I think it's explicit, that on page 5, it says that there's researchers have begun to establish a causal relationship between inequality and productivity. So it's as if the opposite is the truth, which is that the more inequality we have in our society, the less productive we are. And isn't that kind of the heart of the issue? I think Conservatives are trying to say, well, we don't want to address inequality because it will hurt investment and productivity. But I'm actually inferring from this report and the data that you've published here as inferring the exact opposite is the truth, is that if we don't increase tax fairness, if we don't address inequality, then we will continue to struggle with productivity and investment. Is that true from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's generally right. I wouldn't want to go too far to say that inequality is the single biggest driver of productivity, of falling productivity growth or something like that. But I certainly think that, yeah, if workers are being paid very little, they have less incentive to work harder. And, we've seen after decades of trickle-down economics at this point that it has not increased productivity greatly. So I do think that we should make inequality a more explicit goal of our policies.
Okay, thank you for that. How much time do I have left, Chair?
You have 35 seconds.
Okay, so maybe just a quick question. I owned a corporation for 13 years that I ran, and I know that there's significant tax benefits to incorporating, and that's why most sole proprietors, when they get to a certain point of generating enough income, they incorporate because you actually get some tax benefits to that. I don't know who to direct this to, but Mr. Cochran, I know you're an economist. Do you know of the tax benefits from incorporating? I'm specifically sort of interested in farms and other businesses, plumbers, etc., that own their own business and are incorporated. I think they pay significantly less income tax than other members of our society. Is that not true?
And Mr. Cochran, I'll need a very short answer, like 15 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not a tax lawyer. I'm not a tax accountant, and we already saw that you get called out if you try to give tax advice. But Dr. Stanford has already mentioned that there are many ways that incorporating delivers certain tax benefits, and as it was said, the capital gains exclusion is just the icing on the cake. So those benefits all still exist.
And members saying that we rarely have this, but we have enough time for a full third round. And so we're starting with MP Helen for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to make this quick, and I'm hoping we can get to a vote quickly. I hope you'll pause my time because I wanted to move a motion that we have tabled, and I believe it's been distributed to everyone. That given the large workload the committee has on the docket, the committee instructs the chair to book 5 meetings between July 8th and September 13th while the House is adjourned to deal with unfinished business and pressing matters facing Canadians, including the cost of living crisis, housing crisis, and the impact capital gains tax changes will have on Canadian small businesses. Common sense Conservatives are moving this motion because after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal NDP government, they've created a cost of living crisis. Mortgages and rents have doubled. Housing costs are out of control, all while there is a housing crisis that this government caused. Carbon tax 1 and 2 has made gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive. 1 in 4 Canadians that we found out today are not just food insecure, but living in poverty, and there's a record food bank usage across the country. OSFI is warning of a price shock for mortgage holders. Loan loss provisions at Canada's banks are at all-time highs. Organized crime and foreign actors are involved in money laundering in Canada. TD Bank is accused of money laundering the proceeds of fentanyl sales by Chinese drug lords. The job-killing capital gains tax hike punishes workers, small business owners, farmers, fishers, tradespeople, and the family members who inherit property from loved ones. Justin Trudeau has doubled the national debt, and now Canada spends more on servicing the debt than it does on healthcare transfers to the provinces. There are significant issues plaguing this country, yet the Liberal NDP government is more focused on ramming half-baked omnibus bills and tax hikes than listening to real Canadians who are suffering from Justin Trudeau's policies and Chrystia Freeland's spending, all being propped up by the NDP to protect Jagmeet Singh's pension. So common sense Conservatives are ready to work for Canadians over the summer. I hope that my other colleagues around the table are too. Thank you.
You see MP Davies' hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's funny if there was a definition of hypocrisy in the dictionary, it would probably include this motion. I sat here in this meeting while the Conservatives wasted hour after hour after hour after hour. They read from a podcast in order to delay the work of this committee, as this committee, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois, tried to get at the very issues that Mr. Hallen just talked about. And the Conservatives wasted meeting after meeting after meeting in a flight of fancy to do things like calling Mark Carney because they think he's going to be the next Liberal leader, instead of focusing on the cost of living increase, hunger in communities in this country, passing a budget, bringing in tax credits for businesses across this country. The Conservatives delayed every one of those in order for their own partisan flights of fancy, instead of getting at those real issues. And here they are now on one of the last meetings of the year. By the way, at a meeting that they insisted on to study the capital gains inclusion rate, which, by the way, all parties supported because we do want to hear from witnesses. And they were wasting time in the last hour when we have witnesses here to give evidence. You know, this is classic. Common sense, common sense isn't coming to conclusions without data or science. That's the opposite of common sense. That's ridiculousness. I mean, to hear Mr. Hallen talk about the job-killing capital gains measure, we just started the study. We're into it an hour and a half. And by the way, the evidence I'm hearing is frankly to the contrary of that. We haven't heard any real evidence of any impact whatsoever. In fact, we have economists here telling us there will be zero impact on job creation in this country on this capital gains measure. But of course, the Conservatives don't let facts get in the way of conclusions. I mean, they've already made up their mind on this. So, absolutely. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm hearing cat calling from the side while I have the mic, and it's difficult. I didn't yell and
MPs,
talk
members,
when they were
please
talking.
allow the member has the floor. MP Davies, the floor is yours. And members, if you could keep the chatter down, please.
Thank you. Instead of common sense, I'd like some common courtesy. Perhaps would be a rare thing to expect from my Conservative colleagues. So it's absolutely absurd. I mean, this is a stunt to call a committee in the summer. We can call a Section 106 meeting anytime this summer if an emergency comes up. And by the way, the other thing is that I don't know about the Conservatives, but spending time in our communities with our constituents to ask them what their needs are and to find out what's happening in their lives, I think is every bit, in fact, I would say more important than the Conservatives' partisan games to try to look like they're working hard in the summer because they wasted days and days of meetings here, which is what they did do. And that's not a matter of opinion. Go back and look at the record of meetings. It's a mathematical fact. So to hear Mr. Hallen talk about this as a common sense, this isn't common sense move. This is this is not common sense at all. And what I'd like to do is dispense with this motion right away so that I can go back and hearing from every one of these witnesses who has something important to say. They all have different perspectives, and I respect that. But I'm here to hear from them. And the Conservatives continue to do this. They move a motion in the middle of a meeting. They called this meeting and wanted witnesses to come and hear from them and then interrupt the witnesses that we all have called here to get the feedback that we need from them on an important public policy matter. And then they interrupt that and waste the last part of the meeting while we debate some motion that they have for partisan purposes. I'm trying to search for a phrase that describes that, but I'll tell you what, common sense is not one of them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to vote against this, and I think that we should have a quick vote on this. We can get back to hearing from the witnesses whose testimony I'm interested in hearing.
Okay, well, thank you, MP Davies. I see no other speakers. Clerk.
Dr. Fry? Dr. Fry votes against. Ms. Zarowitz?
I vote against.
Mr. Sorbara? Contre. Ms. Thompson.
Against.
Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Mr. Chambers.
Yes.
Mr. Hallan.
In favor.
Mr. Fast.
En faveur.
Mr. Morantz.
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Contre.
Mr. Davies.
Contre.
Yeas pour 4, 4, nays contre 7, 7.
Okay, it's defeated. MP Helen?
I'll turn my time over to Mr. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, just as a point of clarification, I'm not sure what this committee's practice is, but when a member has their time and they use it to move another motion, they don't lose their time? No? I've been on committees where they do.
So time is suspended at that time because it's committee
Thank you.
business. Yes. Okay.
Thanks for
MP
clarification.
Chambers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We'll go back to you, Ms. Brusk, about some of your members. Would you support narrowing the application of this such that we're not going to catch up people who otherwise have very modest incomes, but that have a one-time capital gain event in their life from its application?
I don't support changes to a bill that has yet to be really fully delivered in that way. I think that a one-time event, there are ways to navigate those. We heard about the exemptions. We heard about various different opportunities to lessen the burden, so to speak. And so a one-time event is going to impact very few average workers across this country. The benefit of gaining additional tax revenue far outweighs that one-time event an average worker may have to increase that tax burden by, 13% more of their income being taxed.
Okay, so you're okay with the proposal, the Ways and Means motion, if that becomes the final bill, is that you're okay with that?
I am.
Okay. Mr. Stanford, or Dr. Stanford, I should say, you mentioned that the revenues from this tax were paying for some laudable public policy objectives. But when I look back at the projections from the Finance Department, just a year ago, the debt service costs versus today have gone up by $8 billion just in this current fiscal year, and about $10 billion per year for every year by the time we get to 5 years out. It seems to me that a large share of the revenue from this capital gains tax is actually just paying debt service costs.
If you look at the forecast, the budget forecasts, for some time they've been projecting an increase in debt service charges, both because of the increase in the overall number of size of the debt, but more importantly, the higher interest rates that we're currently grappling with. I think that there's a reasonable logic to linking the incremental spending that was announced in this budget with the incremental revenue measures that were also announced in this budget. Now, of course, money is fungible, so it all goes into the same pot.
I'll just cut in there. I'm linking it to the incremental increase in the debt service costs over and above what was projected a year ago. So, I mean, it's the exact same comparison you're making. You're saying that this money is going towards incremental savings, spending objectives for dental care, et cetera, but there's also incremental expenses that were not projected a year ago.
And the incremental expenses could have been covered from the other changes in revenue forecasts that were also part of this budget. So, I think you're right, sir, that because of the fungibility of money, you can't link $1 on the revenue side to a precise dollar on the expense side. But I think the fact that both of these were incremental policy announcements contained in the same budget, I think makes for a fair connection between the two.
Thank you. I'd be really appreciative of those on the call who have access to some of the data. If they would like to show the perennial capital gains earners, we could narrow this application to those who abuse the tax system and who transfer or try to claim more capital gains taxes than income tax. But I do think, as we've heard today, testimony from people who are living it that are suggesting that this tax isn't just going to be on the 0.13% top income earners. It's actually going to be on a much broader group of individuals. And with no disrespect to those who are educated, I'm reminded of William Buckley, who said he would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the phone book than the entire faculty of Harvard. And I would paraphrase it, suggest I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people of Ms. Bruss's members than some individuals who have not spent the time working in the trenches or building a business, and who say in theory there are these rich people who abuse the system without actually listening to those who are living in the system, saying, well, actually, I'm one of the people affected. I'm not that person you're speaking about. So appreciate the time today, and I'll yield the last and remaining seconds to the floor, Mr.
MP
Chair.
Chambers, and now we're going to go to MP Sorbara.
Thank you, Chair. There is one important element in this discussion that we haven't touched upon today, is with the capital gains inclusion rate change, there'll obviously be revenues being directed to the provinces and territories in a significant amount. And one of the comments that I've heard is this would impact doctors and so forth. And we have seen, for example, the province of British Columbia increase the pay of doctors considerably to deal with such issues. And the provinces, and including the province of Ontario, where I'm an MP from, will have the opportunity to use the funds that they'll receive from the inclusion rate change to increase the pay of doctors. I personally fundamentally feel that doctors, specialists, any folks in those occupations who have gone to school, invested in their human capital for many, many years, deserve to be rewarded for that. And they have a special skill in our society, and we need them. But they shouldn't have to depend on strictly or solely capital gains to fund their livelihoods or fund into their retirement. They should be paid commensurately. And I kind of push it down the provincial line now as well, that they will receive significant funds from the inclusion rate change, which can be directed into their healthcare system. And in fact, on top of that, I was proud to be at the announcement with the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario, Premier Ford, where we announced a $3.1 billion agreement with the province of Ontario. And on top of that, the $200 billion 10-year agreement with all the provinces and the bilaterals we've signed with the provinces. That's the real work I believe Canadians want us to see. On this debate, I'm obviously looking at it from, I want to get rid of surplus stripping. I want to get rid of tax avoidance strategies that are out there at this current time. We need a system where integration is there. We also need a tax system, and I sat on the Finance Committee from 15 to 19, where we broaden the base, lower the rates, make it efficient, fair, more neutral. And this is, to me, one step in the right direction. I will go to Mr. Cochrane. I believe you're from the CLC, if I'm not correct. And are my comments and sort of on that mark in terms of making the system more neutral and fair with the inclusion rate change?
Yeah, I think this inclusion rate change is absolutely a vital first step. And we've heard from Mr. Stefanik, we've heard from the gentleman from the Wheat Growers Association, and they have legitimate concerns. However, capital gains exclusion is an extremely blunt policy tool if we want to ensure the preservation of family farms, if we want to ensure that small business owners have pensions. If we want to achieve those things, we need to implement policies aimed at achieving those things, not maintaining the capital gains exclusion that sees the vast majority of the benefits go to people like the billionaire that Ms. Brusk mentioned in her opening comments. That billionaire made that $4.5 million tax-free buying shares on the secondary market, selling shares on the secondary market. There was zero productive investment that happened with that. The company that he bought and sold those shares of, over the next 3 years, they repurchased $4.5 billion of their own shares and made about $50 million in net capital investment. So our financial system is not doing the things that it's supposed to be doing. There's lots of changes that need to be made. And this modest change is an important step in the right direction. Of course, there's a lot more hard work ahead of us, and I believe all of you around this table are prepared to do that hard work to achieve it, and we hope that you will talk to the CLC about how we might get this entire financial system to be much fairer than it is.
Barra, are you?
Oh,
yeah.
I thought I was out of time.
You had 35 seconds.
Oh, 35. Oh,
Yeah.
no. I think I did think I was out of time. To CLC President Brusk, what would you like to add to this discussion? You represent 3 million hardworking Canadians.
What I said earlier stands. I'm worried about those folks who don't actually have a pension. When we're talking about utilizing, fair taxation so that folks can actually save money for their retirement so that they can retire with dignity, we have a lot of work to do. That means that we need to be able to have the funds available to help those workers out. And it starts by making sure that we have fair taxation in Canada. This is, again, a modest change that is going to have a significant impact.
Thank you. And now to MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you again to Mr. Godbout. I looked at your presentation very closely, and I returned to the 4 issues that you pointed out. One of which was to give a bit more time to taxpayers, say 6 months, to allow them to digest this, but that's not going to be the case. So if I understood, you also spoke to the need for flexibility. If you could explain in detail on paper what this consists of, it would be helpful. Well, let me say that when people make their tax declaration, when they file for 2024, they should have the possibility of saying before June 25th they chose to dispose of certain goods. For example, people who have real estate holdings, that they decided themselves to dispose of a certain amount of their holdings. It's not magic. They would be taxed at about 50% before making their filing. So for 2024, that should apply, and then it could kick in for 25 and beyond. That would be a lot better for people, less stress, fairer. The people would have the time to quickly consult professionals. Thank you. Now, I read the explanation on sites, financial sites, with the changes. They excluded the possibility of integrating this change into the legislation. What do you think about that? Well, I don't know why they excluded it. I believe in it. In 1994 position, the federal government at the time had put such a choice, such an option in place. And people were able, therefore, at that time to, in the spring of 95 until from February 24, to retrospectively do that. Well, I would like to ask you more questions on the elements, but my time is out. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Mr. St. Marie.
Thank you. Dr. Stanford, I'd like to talk about an issue that I don't think has been raised at this meeting, and that's the Canadian Entrepreneurs Incentive will reduce the inclusion rate to 33.3% on a lifetime maximum of $2 million in eligible capital gains. Combined with the enhanced lifetime capital gains exemption, when this incentive is fully rolled out, entrepreneurs will have a combined exemption of at least $3.2 million when selling all or part of a business. According to the government figures, entrepreneurs with eligible capital gains of up to $6.25 million will be better off under these changes. Do you have any comment on that particular aspect of the change?
It is important to keep in mind that the existing exemptions under the capital gains tax that we already have, including the principal residence exemption, the lifetime exemption for farms and small businesses, are maintained, and in the farms and small business case expanded. And now this new entrepreneurship credit will provide a lower capital gains inclusion rate than we have at present for that $2 million lifetime. So there's a significant share, probably the strong majority of small businesses that will actually be better off under this reform than they are at present.
Thank you. Final question to Canadians for Tax Fairness. I just want to be clear on this. Mr. Polyev has stated that he argued the reforms, quote, will drive billions of dollars of machines, technology, business, and paychecks out of our country. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're worried about capital flight, I mean, where I think we're normally worried about that is to the U.S. And so I just note that President Biden's recent budget proposed an even larger increase in the top marginal tax rate on capital gains than this proposal is there. So, and I also think that Canada, has a very skilled workforce and generous tax credits, and so there's a lot of reasons that companies will want to be here, and I don't think this is going to cause a significant exodus.
Thank you, MP Davies. Next, I have MP Morantz, and then I know we'll go a little bit over members. We'll then MP Thompson to finish off this round. MP Morantz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cochrane, you said a few minutes ago that the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate is a blunt instrument, and that I'm paraphrasing, but it's unfortunate that people like Mr. Stefanik and Mr. Yoakum get caught up in it, because the real point of it is to get at the very wealthy high earners that are really in the 0.13%. Would you agree then, is it worth trying in this process we're studying the proposed legislation, is it worth trying to come up with a mechanism to exempt folks like Mr. Stefanik and Mr. Yoakum, so that who are legitimately not part of the 0.13% from having to pay an inclusion rate over and above the 50%?
I don't think it's the appropriate means of making sure they're not paying it. I think we need to take, as best as we can, the Carter Commission's recommendation that you tax all forms of income and then provide other mechanisms to ensure that taxes are being leveled where you want them to be leveled. So provide credits as a means of people reducing their tax burdens, rather than leaving this area of certain forms of income that aren't going to get taxed, which then just entices all kinds of deformations of how people are going to operate to avoid having income that gets taxed at all.
Fair enough, but at the end of the day, I think we're getting to the same place in two different ways. So you would agree that folks like Mr. Stefanik and Mr. Yoakum, who are not legitimately part of the 0.13%, should be made whole and not be penalized the way the high earners would be.
I mean, I don't know their exact financial situations. I'm assuming that they are looking at reasonable gains. It's worth mentioning with regards to the different changes that are going to be made that it's at $6.2 million in capital gains, that once all of the changes are implemented, at $6.2 million, you're going to be paying higher capital gains than under the current rules. So if those gentlemen are looking at more than $6.2 million in capital gains, good for them, but also they have an obligation to pay into our tax system. All people do.
There are people like them who are not part of the 0.13%, who are caught up in this, who are not part of that group. And all I'm asking you to confirm is that you would agree that they shouldn't be taxed at the higher inclusion rate.
I will agree that you have work ahead of you to make sure that our tax system is fairly applied to all Canadians.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And now over to MP Thompson, please, for our final questioner.
Thank you. And Dr. Stanford, I'm sorry I referenced you as Mr. Stanford before. My apologies. Some professionals incorporate to obtain generous tax and liability benefits. And there's been criticisms that essentially we're killing working class jobs and even hindering entire sectors as a result of the tax change. Would you give your response to those criticisms, please?
I don't believe that this change in the inclusion rate will have any impact on actual real investment spending by Canadian businesses. Businesses don't buy machinery in order to try and sell it later at a profit. That's where the capital gains issue would be most relevant. And for running and maintaining a profitable business, this change will have no impact. In terms of professionals, there are huge advantages, not just tax advantages, but also issues about protecting liability for the professionals involved. And if they decide that those advantages are no longer relevant, then they can organize their businesses differently. But I doubt very many will do that. They'll still continue to access those benefits of incorporation.
Thank you. And I'm the final speaker, and I'm going to give you the final word. Any closing comments on what you heard today?
Thank you. Again, this is obviously a very passionate debate, but I think it's an important one. It's a long-standing controversy in tax policy that Canada's partial inclusion system was so generous, not just unfair in terms of delivering so much tax advantage to generally very high-income people, but also inefficient in terms of distorting decisions that companies make about corporate structure and stripping cash from businesses in order to take advantage of this loophole. So I think this measure is modest and timely, and I support it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, MP Thompson. We thank our witnesses. I do need to hold the members' attention for a second, and because I do need your approval for something. So the clerk and the chair, I'm asking, would be empowered to publish. We do this every year, a news release to launch the pre-budget consultations process. Request submissions with a provisional deadline for the submissions of briefs of Friday, August 2nd, 2024. Okay. Okay. Thank you, members. August 2nd, 2024. Yeah.
Isn't that what is that, a Friday?
It's a Friday, yes.
Friday of a long weekend?
I don't know. Wow. It is Friday of a long weekend, wow. Yes. There you go. Okay, thank you. And MP Davies?
Mr. Chair, did we set any kind of deadline for further witnesses for the resumption of this study in the fall? Or will you send a note around maybe in the summer for when we can get those names in?
Yeah, we have not set a deadline, but we can send something around. Thank you very much, members, and to our witnesses, thank you very much for your testimony. And at this time, we are adjourned.